There we go. So yes, thank you for that, Johan, and some great speakers so far today, and more to come with Luis Maria, who will be following me after this and look into things a little bit more detail. So again, as Johan has mentioned there, it's not long since I've been on here, so many of you may have seen a couple of the slides that I'm about to present today, but to give it a little bit more context. So for those that don't know me, I'm Philip Nothard. I'm the Insight and Strategy Director here at Cox Automotive, part of the UK, European and international teams. And today I'm going to try and share some thoughts around some of the insight on where the used car market is today and the factors that have led us to where we are and what maybe we should be thinking about in the weeks, months and even years ahead as we move forward. So to begin with, let me just share a little bit about Cox Automotive. You will get a copy of these slides anyway, but just to sort of give you an idea of the size and scale of Cox Automotive, and obviously from today's audience, particularly focused on the European market and the UK market, but you can see there that we do span right across the globe with different types of footprints in different marketplaces. So very much a global business there with with 40,000 clients globally in 220 locations. So when we're trying to talk about insight and predict the market, there's a lot going on in different marketplaces, as we'll start to see throughout the next sort of 15, 20 minutes. So I was originally going to talk about sourcing vehicles in these times of shortage, but I think to begin with, I think it's probably clear that, where we understand where we are and where we kind of go from here. And, without getting into some of the data and connectivity subjects that Andrea and Audi have just shared earlier, because, clearly, whether that is about the collection and the management and understanding of data and the complexity that brings around the things like the ADAS systems, etc., but also what you can do with that data, what Audi were talking about in terms of that legalities around GDPR and how complex our sector, particularly the remarketing sector, is becoming increasingly as we move forward. But things are changing so fast right now. So by the time I came to pull this together, my thoughts for this session, it had already felt that we were potentially out of date. And I'm sure that many of you be feeling that way now that, things that you were looking at weeks, months ago have significantly moved on since then. But the market isn't as strong right now. It is starting to see a little bit of weakening in various different markets for many different reasons, some in our control and some that are outside of our control. So instead, I thought I'd spend this time to sort of examine what's happening, why it's happening, and where we can go from here. So just looking at some of the complexity, pre-pandemic and pre the acceleration of electrification, the market was fairly steady, fairly stable. We kind of fairly easier to predict in many ways. And, whether we're looking at the UK in a pre-Brexit environment with the European market and the European markets themselves, there was a lot more commonality across each of the markets. But, right now, even just looking at some of the four markets there with the UK, Germany, Spain, Italy, France, even, that, we can see there from the AutoVista data how different and how complex each of the markets are performing as we recover from the different levels of lockdown, the different levels of restriction, the changes and demand on the marketplace around supply. Those that, were hit more within the high levels of the pandemic around the shortages of supply and what that's done to the used vehicle market as we recover out of this. And just seeing there the differences between those forecasts around whether that's looking at the sales volumes or even the residual value forecasted, how uncommon it is in terms of how complex it is becoming. And I think Johan mentioned the word uncertainty and complexity. We are certainly heading into that kind of market currently. And even just this morning in the UK, The UK government have announced that they've stopped and removed the plug-in grant for the EV initiative in the UK. And that's been done without any notice whatsoever across the manufacturer and the dealer market here in the UK. So currently those that may be plugging in there from the UK, there's administrators right across the UK dealer network there that, you know, they've got systems that just won't let them access the grants, won't let them put them onto the systems from orders that they've taken previously. So, you know, when we talk about challenges and complexities, you can see what is starting to come. You know, the performance of today versus the pre-pandemic performance of the marketplace. You know, and we've got to think about, you know, where is all this heading? How soon could we start to return to some kind of normality? Is there a normality? You know, is it a world of known unknowns in many ways, and an increased complexity that not only the dealer sector, the OEM market, and the remarketing sector that sits right in the middle of all this need to try and understand and engage with as we move forward. So as I say, you know, many of you, we talk about the loss of new vehicles, and no doubt this is, you know, what that has an impact on used vehicles. We know that fewer new cars have been manufactured over the last 2 years. We're not going to necessarily return to the 2018 volume levels of 96 million manufactured vehicles per annum. And what does this mean around the new and emerging markets as we move forward? You know, we've got fewer vehicles being manufactured. You've got OEMs talking about moving away from the mainstream city car, super mini markets and more into the premium, higher end product. You've got the influx of the volumes coming out of Chinese markets into both Europe, UK, and other international and global markets. So significant heavy volumes. You know, we've got new and emerging markets as rental operators become a significant buyer and a volume used cars. They've got sales teams now, as well as sellers. They are buyers, and they know that is going to be the case for the next year, 2 years. Could even be permanent for the rental operators in our market. You know, we've got different supply channels that remain limited or closed. We talk about the shift towards agency that not only impacts what's happening in the new vehicle market, but actually when you start to look at what the OEMs are talking about under the world of agency, that starts to limit what happens in the used vehicle market as they try and take control of what's happening in the used and certain that nearly new marketplace as they look to ring fence much of their product for those agency models. So as I say, some of you may have seen these numbers before. You know, comparing the 2 years of 2020 and 2021 compared to the prior years of 18 and 19, we've produced 31 million fewer new vehicles in the global market. And that is not going to recover tomorrow. It's going to be very much some time before you can start to see some recovery of those volumes, if at all. So those vehicles are new cars that will never enter the used vehicle park, whether that's in the UK, whether that's in Europe or any of the international and global markets. They're never going to return. Over that same period, just looking at the 5 European markets, we've lost 6.5 million new vehicle registrations. So that alone has a significant impact just on those 5 marketplaces, let alone the rest of the European market or even some of the international markets. We know that consumer demand for used vehicles is still fairly strong, all things considered. Vehicle supply is down. We know it's easing in terms of demand, but what is keeping it fairly stable at the minute is that supply constraints. And just to share, this is UK data. So this is data through the Mannheim auction centres. So this is looking at the percentage of cost new, just to give you some clarity and understanding of where the values have increased from. So looking at the index point from December of 2019, all the way through to today, you can see the acceleration of that percentage of cost new. Highly, you know, more so in that 0 to 12, 0 to 24 marketplace, but right across all the age points, we've seen that acceleration continue. We've seen increased margin retention, both in the new and used vehicles. Many retail operators, finances and results have been extraordinary in many ways with some of the finances that we've seen on the back of this. But what are we looking at going forward? What are the challenges as we start to see the slowdown of this? We know that this kind of performance cannot continue, but we also know that there's no influx of used cars anytime soon on the horizon. So when we talk about emerging markets, as I mentioned earlier, the used car market dynamics are starting to change. And as we say there, rental operators now being severe competitors to used car buyers. They're becoming, as I said earlier, used car buyers as well as sellers, because they're certainly not high on the agenda for the manufacturers to start supply anytime soon. In addition to that, we've got the shift towards agency, which in many cases will include used cars, as they try and ensure that that consumer that's looking at a new car may also look at that 0 to 6, 0 to 12, 0 to 24-month-old vehicle. So therefore, the manufacturers are looking at ways that they can ring fence those vehicles and keep them within the agency model. This adds further complexity of what the pressures will be. What does that mean for those operators outside of those franchise agency models? What does that mean for the supermarkets that rely on heavy volume supply that may not be able to get access to some of this product? We know that there is this push towards online, but actually we need to do this at the minute while securing what we're doing in the physical space. We've got to remember, in the middle of all this, there is still a physical asset that needs moving, needs imaging, needs repairing, needs storing, etc., etc. So although we are moving to this online environment, there is still an asset that remains at the center of all of what we do in the remarketing world. We know that there is a move towards remarketing to be kept in-house. Just in the last 24, 48 hours, we've seen a release from Renault talking about their refurbishment of their own used cars on scale and centralized. We've got to think about what this means for us as a remarketing sector. We know that the change of ownership, change of usage is going to continue, whether that's through the OEM space or whether that's the fleet marketplace. And we know that the changes are coming very, very rapidly. And in many ways, these are all coming at the same time. We've got this centralization of many different trends hitting us all at once. What we can't forget is the big subject of electrification and what that means for the remarketing sector. Are we ready? Have we got the infrastructure? Have we got the expertise? Think about this for the remarketing sector. We know that the onset of EVs is coming. We know that the percentage share of electrification in the new vehicle market is continuing to increase year on year, month on month. This is coming. And these vehicles will start to enter the used vehicle space, our wholesale remarketing space, significantly over the coming years. We're always talking about the charging infrastructure in the consumer space. We just touched on before about those grants, the initiatives that are taking place that vary market to market. They vary from market to market within the European, they vary from the UK, and when you start looking at some of the broader spaces such as the US and other marketplaces. What about the logistics? Have we got the network of logistic operators to support that significant asset of investment into transport and support around EV? We've got these transporters that will take, up to 15 to 20 combustion engines. But they can't take that same volume of electric vehicles because of the weight. Have we thought about the end of contract? Making sure that the end of contract collection, there is a significant mileage range left on that vehicle when we do go and collect it from the user. Have we got the physical inventions in place within the wholesale sector and the remarketing sector ready for the volumes that are coming back into this marketplace? And Johan and I and the others were talking the other day about, maybe we need to think about a webinar purely on the electrification of the remarketing sector, because there's many areas in this that we know the volumes are coming. It's when you invest. How much do you invest? When do you invest? If you invest today, are you future-proofing what is ahead? You know, we're already talking about solid-state batteries, but actually the remarketing sector hasn't necessarily invested in the technology of today. And already we're talking about what the next evolution of the battery technology is around the corner. You know, that's some big things on here. You know, we talk about, you know, we've got heavy investment and research to stay ahead of the future demands of the fuel type evolution. You know, at Cox Automotive, we're investing in SNT, which is Spear's new technology, and they're to focus on the vehicle's life cycle management of advanced batteries. But it still takes time. These are not happening very quickly. These things take a lot of time. And as we're building on today, there are new things on the horizon. They're coming very, very quickly. It's not like the combustion engine where it's just a small change. It's a small evolution of it. This is significant technology changes that we're starting to see on the EV sector. So where do we go from here? What do we do next? I mean, you know, from my perspective here, you know, we've got to start to think about, you know, what is the consumer market looking like? What are buyer behaviors? How are they going to interact with the dealer? How are they going to interact with the OEM in the world of agency? How are the OEMs and dealers going to work together? Where does the remarketing sector sit between that? Where can we support that new evolution of agency model? Is it in the refurbishment and movement of vehicles? Is it in the vehicle handover? Is it in the appraisal and underwriting of the vehicle places? We've got to think about this because this whole world is starting to change. The integration of mobility. We talk about mobility a lot, but actually that diversification of ownership models, you know, we're no longer set in these fixed terms. It's a lot more flexible. We have to be a lot more adaptable than we've ever been before as a remarketing sector to the changes and the demands that will be coming towards us. We have a lot of converging factors contributing to the complexity. You know, not only what we've got going on in the economy, not only what we've got in a post-Brexit environment in the UK and other marketplaces. You know, there's a lot more starting to hit our sector that we need to understand. You know, legislations that are on the horizon, consumer demand. You know, we've got this pull towards this new electrification, hybrid marketplace, but we need to support it. But it's not for everybody. There'll be different demands at different levels across different marketplaces. We are obviously looking to be a leaner, stronger wholesale ecosystem, but that's how we start to become in this virtual space, this online and physical space, and how we bring them all together in one place. And as I said earlier, you know, the advent of the new retail models. Do we actually know what that looks like? Do we know what that means for the used vehicle marketplace as we move forward? You may have heard me talk about this many times before. It's not the best acronym, but you know, I think clearly it does sum up the market that we find ourselves in. You know, we've certainly got, no doubt, a lot of volatility, and as we've just heard before, you know, we've got a lot of uncertainty, not around what's happening in the automotive sector in terms of strategies, but actually outside of our sector that we cannot control, we cannot influence what is happening in that market. It's certainly becoming more complex, and there's levels of ambiguity within that. You know, as I say there, you know, the vehicle supply challenges will continue. I predict that we'll see this continue at least into 2023, if not 2024. There's a lot of things for the OEMs to sort out at different levels. You know, we've got this difference around supply. We've got to think about that new future of vehicles around specification. I might have touched on it previously, but you know, we've all seen what's happening with the issues around semiconductors. But vehicles have gone into the wholesale space that have got items missing, standard specification that is not on that vehicle because they didn't have the electronics or the semiconductor provided. Are we confident that all those vehicles will get resolved and those parts and those items will be aftermarket fitted, or will we have increased volumes of used cars going around our used vehicle park with items that are just not on that vehicle that should be standard, either standard specification on this base model or actually part of an additional pack that have never been fitted to that vehicle at all. We've got the demand at the minute. We have got a supply and demand imbalance. I think as we move through the time, the challenge will be is if demand starts to return at the levels that we saw last year, we still won't have the supply to meet demand. You know, we're starting to see an easing of wholesale values right across the market, not to the level that we saw in terms of the pre-pandemic. They are starting to ease off a little bit. But where will that head as we go forward? If demand returns, supply remains constrained, we may start to see a rise in used car values again, and again we'll be fighting against that percentage of cost new. We've got the new retail models, we've got changes within the rental market. They're all starting to come together at once. So I think for me, I mean, I put the statement there that the time to fix the roof is when the sun is shining. You know, we've seen all the financials come out, not only from the OEMs, but the retail operators across the UK, Europe, and in some of the international markets. And we've got to spend this time now to put some of these actions in place, try and understand what is happening in our remarketing sector. What are the challenges that some of these changes will affect us? When do we need to be ready? When do we need to start to think about investing? Back over to you, Johan.
Thanks, Philip. And of course, we will see you back in a few minutes for the discussion, a panel discussion. So for people, if you haven't yet put any question, feel free, and then we will have them during the panel discussion. Thank you, Philip.